You're listening to the 2018 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Program. This Thinking Brunch balancing act features Lizzie Marvelly, Holly Walker, Rajorshi Chakraborti and Renee Liang in conversation with Michele A'Court. Morena, welcome. I'm delighted to see you here this morning. Thank you for coming along to our very first Thinking Brunch, balancing act, juggling work and family. And we have a fantastic panel of authors for you today and people to talk about the topic. But I'm going to hand over to our chair of this session, Michele A'Court, very soon. But just a few things first. First of all, my name is Kerry Sunderland and I'm the Readers and Writers Coordinator. I keep forgetting to tell people that. I just want to let you know that we are going to have questions towards the end of today's session. And also you will be able to buy each of the people on the panel's books and get them to sign them afterwards if you like. So over here at our Page and Blackmore bookshop. So a big thank you to Joe and Page and Blackmore for sponsoring Readers and Writers. And also a reminder, a little housekeeping thing, to please turn off your phones if you haven't already or pop them on silent. And this session is being recorded and will be available as a podcast afterwards. So that means that when we get to question time, I'm going to run around with this mic, and if you could please use the mic to ask your questions so we can get them in the recording as well. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and over to you, Michele.
Thank you, Kerry. That's fantastic. I ngā reo, i ngā waka, i ngā karangatanga maha, nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui, whakahirahira i te rānei. Me mihi ka tiki ki te mana whenua o whakatū, e ngā iwi, tēnā koutou, kei a kurangatira, tēnā koutou, kia tātou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Morena, everybody. Welcome to this is the first of the Thinking Brunches for the festival. This is the balancing act. And as Kerry said, we have four fantastic writers with us this morning who are at different stages of working out how to balance work and family. And so I'm going to introduce them. I'll give you a little thumbnail of each of them so that you can see maybe which one matches up to the place that you're at in your life. So I'm going to begin with Holly. Holly has two daughters, Esther, who is a newly minted 5-year-old, and Nairi, who is 1. Holly's just finished a year of parental leave and gone back to work 2 days a week as principal advisor to the Children's Commissioner. She also does some freelance writing and started her PhD in creative writing at the Institute of Modern Letters at Vic Uni in March. Now that's a full-time course, so already you're getting the picture that those hours don't really add up. These days, Holly's partner Dave is the main earner and works full-time, but they have arranged things differently before, and we're going to talk about that too. And Holly's fantastic book, The Whole Intimate Mess, is a really honest, vivid description of her life from 2011 to 14 when she served a term in Parliament as both a brand new Green Party MP and also a brand new mother. So this is Holly. Make her feel very welcome. And so next to Holly is Renee. Renee also has 2 children, a boy who's 4.5 and a girl who is 6. Renee's husband is a full-time stay-at-home parent and she is the salary earner, which may sound like a dream, but we're going to unpack how much of a dream that is as we go. Renee is a paediatrician and she and her family live in Auckland. That's where she works now, but before that she spent 2.5 years commuting to other cities for work, home just for the weekends, and we're going to unpack the pros and cons of being a weekend mum as well. She is also a playwright, poet, and the co-author of When We Remember to Breathe, which is not hot off the press. It's still on the press, but we have you're able to pre-order those today. We'll talk about that later, and you can have a chat with Renee afterwards. And I do also want to mention that Renee was pronounced Next Woman of the Year in Arts and Culture for 2018 on Thursday night. Huge round of applause for Renee. You're already getting the impression that we've just got a bunch of lazy asses on the stage, right? So, and over here we have Rajorshi Chakraborti. I didn't even check how to, is that good? So this is Rajorshi Chakraborti, and Raj and his partner Sasha have a 6-year-old daughter. Her name's Leela. Raj was Leela's stay-at-home parent after Sasha returned to full-time work, and they also had help from a caregiver and a creche so that he could write and work part-time. Now that Leela's at school, Raj has more time to work. He's still the parent with the most flexible working hours, so does the pick-up and drop-offs and activities and so forth most of the time. School holidays right now, so Raj and Sasha are supported by a caregiver, so they can both keep working. And Raj's beautiful novel, The Man Who Would Not See, was published earlier this year. It's divine, and Raj is doing a session on that book this afternoon. So a huge round of applause. Fantastic. And sitting next to me is the delightful Lizzie Marvelly. She's not a parent, but she's been asked about becoming a parent in media interviews since she was a teenager. It's not a question that reporters ask in All Black on debut, but it is a question they'll ask the woman who sings the national anthem before kickoff. So Lizzie doesn't have experience of parenting, but she has experience of some of society's expectations that all women will one day be a mother. And also as a bisexual woman, Lizzie will be able to offer some other perspectives on the assumptions about parenting based on the male-female gender binary. And Lizzie's book, of course, That F Word, was published last month, and Lizzie did a session on that yesterday, so that's available at the end too. Huge round of applause for Lizzie. And I'm going to help drive the conversation. Occasionally I might chuck in my 5 cents worth. I'm no longer a 24/7 parent. I have a grown-up daughter, and I'm the nana of 2 unusually beautiful and gifted grandchildren. No, seriously, I mean, you laugh, but after this session, please do come and have a look at photographs of my grandchildren. So that's good. And as Kerry said, you'll have a chance at the end to ask some questions. So what we're going to settle down, ladies. So I'm going to begin. I want all of us to think about this question. I want everybody in the room to just have a little think about this question, as well as the people on the stage. And the question is, can I have a career and a family? Now, I'm not really interested in the answer necessarily from all of you, but I want us to just hold that question in our head, because my theory is that every woman in this room has asked herself that question and will ask herself that question many times throughout her life, and that it's not a question that men have to ask themselves. And I may be wrong about that. So what I'm going to do now is ask this panel if that question, can I have a career and a family, is a question that is familiar to you. Do you want to start, Renee?
Yeah. Yes, I guess I being a paediatrician, it's very clear that I like children and that I've kind of always intended to have them. And for me, because the career came first, it was about, could I manage to have a family while, like physically get a partner and keep them long enough to get pregnant, actually. While also training. And it is actually a very real problem. I mean, there's a lot of my colleagues that have not really managed to essentially have the children in time before the biological clock kicked in. So, yeah, and my children were born when I was 39 and 41, so, I barely made it myself. And yeah, it's very interesting. Clearly for me, the answer is yes, but I do realise how lucky I am, and I'm lucky because I did manage to find that dream guy who was very happy to share the parenting or even take the bulk of it, and which has actually been the case for the whole time that we've had our children so far, but which I think it's important that this be renegotiated all the time, and certainly in my group of friends, some of whom have also faced very similar decisions. It is a thing, the male sometimes takes the first 9 months off, and then they swap. And that happened to my sister. My sister's a surgeon, so similarly, she went back to work, quite quickly, I think 6 weeks after giving birth, and then her husband, who's just a lowly psychiatrist, took over, and then they both went back to work when the grandparents managed to, move into their home and look after. So there's different ways of doing it. And, I guess I've also touched on some of the other issues is that, the whole, can we, the two parents looking after children thing, that's quite essentially, it's only one cultural worldview of all the cultures that we have in New Zealand. There are actually lots of other cultures, particularly Māori, Pacific Island, but also Asian cultures, and Croatian. So my in-laws are Croatian, where essentially extended family are considered, potential carers as well, and that it's completely normal and expected that they take part in that. And so maybe it's a challenge that I can put out to people.
Yeah, it's interesting. The question comes at us from both directions, doesn't it? You've just expressed it as I have a career, can I add a family to it? And sometimes it's I have a family, can I realistically add a career as opposed to a job to it? But also the point that you're making, my situation was that I had, when my daughter I was a single parent, and my parents came in and were my extra pair of hands in the household, so renegotiating all along the way. Yeah, anyway, that's enough. Holly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The first time I remember thinking about that question was reading what I think is still my favourite book ever in the world, which is a young adult novel by Tessa Duda called Alex, about a champion swimmer. And there's a part in there, she's growing up in the 1950s, and it's a lot about what it's like to grow up chafing against those gender norms and expectations. And she expresses it at one point like, yeah, I want to be a champion swimmer, I want to go to the Olympics, I want to be a lawyer. And then she says, a husband, kids, yeah, maybe I can have those things too. And that's probably, I was 9 when I read that. That's probably the first time I'd seen that dilemma expressed, but also it was expressed in that order, and that probably made quite a big impression on me as a young girl. But then I grew up as a teenager. My brother and sister are 10 and 12 years younger than me, so my mum, she says, shamelessly used me as a built-in babysitter. Again, another model of care, I guess. So I grew up as a teenager taking care of young kids, and so I felt very confident when it came time to have my own children that I knew what I was doing and that I would be good at it. And I wrote in my book about having grown up being quite good at whatever I did, and so I just assumed that when I had kids I would just be really good at that as well, and I'd help to bring up my brother and sister, so I was like, yeah, I got this. And I was an MP, I was 30 when I had my first child, and I had been in Parliament for just under a year, and it was, it was a complete shit show. So I had to very quickly reconsider that question. And I guess the conclusion I came to was, yes, I can have a career in a family, but it's not going to be this career as a politician. That was not compatible. It's certainly not compatible with, for some people it totally is, and we can talk about that more, it's obviously very topical. But for me, and the particular challenges we had at that time, which is that I had pretty severe postnatal depression and anxiety, and my partner had pretty severe chronic pain. The combination of the big job, the baby, and those things just meant no way.
Yeah, and you paint that picture so beautifully in your book. It's great. And it's so lovely to see women being honest about, that whole thing, oh, we can have it all, it's so easy, you're just super, and you just went, oh, this is shit. It's really hard. Raj, can I jump to you now? Is that a question that you have asked in your lifetime? Can I be a writer and be a parent?
Yeah, although in our situation, we were able to ask those questions collectively as a unit, us and me and my partner. My partner's kind of my Kiwi connection. She's the one from Wellington, and that's why I'm in New Zealand. And I think in the kind of micro, which is the everyday living of our lives, I think we've kind of got that balance kind of more or less right, which is that we're both able to kind of by kind of really being good partners and communicating, we're both able to get the balance right between kind of giving as much time as we would love to Leela and being able to do our work as well. I guess for me, the one trade-off has been in the kind of macro, by which I mean that apart from this book, The Man Who Would Not See, all of my work, much of my work remains to do with India. Like, even though I left India 24 years ago, I still write about India, present-day India. So the two earlier books I published while living in New Zealand before The Man Who Would Not See were set in India. The book I'm writing right now, I'm close to finishing, is again set very much in the political moment in present-day India. So what I was coming to was this trade-off in the macro, which is that as a writer, I feel that it would be wonderful to spend more time in India, where much of my imagination still remains absorbed. But as a family, what we've talked about many times and have come to the conclusion is really best both for Sasha, for our daughter as an environment in which to grow up, for all sorts of reasons, beginning with the air quality in Indian cities, to the unbelievable pressures of the education system, to all of the unfortunate dimensions that go with gender in India, what it is to be seen as a girl. It's very clear to us that we would like our daughter to grow up in New Zealand. So there is that trade-off, which is what might be good for me as a writer is not necessarily good for us as a family. And so that's one thing we've... So the answer is to come up with more New Zealand stories. I have to find more material here.
That's a really nice way of putting it, that the micro is great, but it has an effect on the big picture version of who you are as a writer.
Yeah.
So Lizzie, this is probably a question that you ask yourself?
This is something actually that I'm grappling with right now in the current moment, because I hadn't really, to be honest, I hadn't really even considered the reality of having a family and trying to combine that with a career. Because I've always been a career girl, and I grew up with this. I grew up in the heady days of girls can do anything and girl power and all of that. And I think I'd always thought, probably aided or possibly deceived by my mother, who managed to have this, pretty incredible career. My parents worked together. They owned a hotel, which is really difficult for family life. But she still managed to have me and still have this career, aided by nannies. And there was definitely childcare in that. But what I've realised actually just this year, because this year for me has been utterly bonkers in every possible way, particularly with work, because it's been amazing. I've had an awesome time, but I've made a web series, founded a festival, made a documentary, released a book, and done a whole bunch of other stuff, which has been so stimulating and great, but completely exhausting. And what I've realised now is that I actually can't do this much stuff and even really have a relationship. I was in a relationship and it suffered pretty badly from my workload. So adding children into that on top of it, I think would be completely unfeasible. So it's kind of like I've just whacked up against this wall of reality where I've gone, oh crap, I actually kind of can't do absolutely everything. But it's good in a way because I'm thinking about it, but I also feel like there would be a lot of my kind of male counterparts who are working at similar levels and with similar workloads who wouldn't really have to think about that, because that would be something that the other partner would take on.
Yeah, I mean, I've always dreamt, fantasized about the idea of having a wife.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's possible in my situation.
So terrific. Yeah. So
It'd be fine.
yeah.
That may be the solution,
Yeah,
guys.
well, it could be. I mean, I've one of my dear friends, Ursula Carlson, is her wife is the stay-at-home parent.
Yeah, and they're great. I love those women. They're awesome.
Yeah, and I just look at that and go, oh, I made a wrong choice.
It's never too late, Michelle.
So I gave a little snapshot, a thumbnail of how you arrange things at home, but let's talk about that practical stuff of how you arrange it, because it struck me in preparing for this that we don't actually talk about that very often. I often think that women, and maybe men too, live their lives like swans, where, you know, you're all gorgeous and floating across, and underneath it's like this. And so let's find out what's going on at home. Who wants to start? Can I ask you, Holly? Because, tell us how you have arranged things now.
So, so my oldest daughter has just turned 5, and she actually starts school on Monday, which is very momentous in our household. But she has been, so maybe if I go back, when she was born, I was in Parliament, and the plan was that I would go back to work quite quickly and Dave would be her stay-at-home parent, and that's what we did for the first almost year of her life.
And can I ask, that was a decision made because of the job that you were doing, which was new, thrilling, exciting, the dream job, right? So in that moment, your job took precedence over Dave's.
It did, although we also, so I think there's a number of ways in which my views have changed over time around this stuff. One thing I felt really, really strongly at that time was that there was absolutely no reason why the parenting load couldn't be shared equally right from the start, from as soon as the baby came out, basically, you know. And I was committed to the idea of breastfeeding, but I also had this idea, which I think permeates a lot in culture, that it's a food source and you just express it, and if you're not with the baby you can just pump the milk and give it to the baby. And so I was like, well, that'll be fine, I'll go back to Parliament, she'll be with her parents, so I won't feel any concern about not being with her because she'll be with her other parent, and that's ideal, and I can pump the milk and she can get the best food, and so I can't see why that would be difficult at all. And of course, I discovered that there's a whole lot more going on psychologically, emotionally, hormonally when you have a newborn baby, and that breastfeeding is in fact not just about a food source, but about so much else in terms of connection with the baby and everything like that. So when I went back to work, she was maybe 3 months old, I really felt as though I was tearing myself in two. You know, I would be at Parliament and they would be at home in Petone, and I'd look out the window of my Bowen House office and I would imagine I could see this cord stretching to where my baby was. And it was just so much harder than I thought it would be. Dave really enjoyed it. He loved it, in fact, but he has a mild form of muscular dystrophy, which we'd known about for a long time, but it had never really caused any issues in his ability to do what he wanted to do, so we didn't really factor it in, which was silly because all of the lifting involved with the baby meant that he injured his back, and then because of the underlying condition it didn't get better in the way that it would for other people, so that was how he developed chronic pain. And basically we came to the point after about 9 months of that it was unfeasible for him to continue doing that, and also my mental health was suffering so badly from this just cocktail of hormones and separation and stressful job and all of that. So what we do now, we've since had a second child. We had 4-year age gap. I think it took us 4 years to recover from that traumatic experience and consider trying to do it again. And I still believe very strongly in the principle of sharing parenting arrangements, but I've come to the conclusion that you don't have to do all of that at the same time. I'm much more okay with taking some time out of work, which I have done, and just return part-time. And also, I think Dave is quite keen that in a few years, when both of the girls are, you know, primary school age and can lift themselves in and out of cars, and that he might get a chance to be the primary parent for a while. There's no rush. We were in such a hurry, and I felt so strongly we should be doing this right from the start and modelling this really modern way of parenting. Didn't really think about the fact there's plenty of time to do that, and it might make sense to actually divide those periods of care up differently. So yeah, I've just returned to work after a year off. I have 2 days a week that the baby's in daycare. She's with me for the other 3 days, during which time I try to do my PhD work when she's asleep. So roughly 30 minutes a day. And in the weekend, Dave will do things like take both of them out so I can have some time by myself.
Yeah, that's really important too. No, interesting. So that renegotiating, rethinking, working out what really matters, and so it's like we're improvising how to do this, aren't we? So you've tried some different ways of doing stuff.
Yeah.
How do you arrange things now, and how has it been before?
So I've just come from a period of 16 months where I was commuting to Whangarei for work. So at that stage, the children were living in Mount Albert in Auckland with their dad, and I basically slept 4 nights in Auckland, and then got up really early and took the flight to Whangarei, and then worked for 4 days, and then took an afternoon flight back to Auckland. And in between there was lots of texting and so on. My children at that stage, my child started school last year, so we also had a school-age child. So basically, my husband is an amazing. He's much more organised than I am, so it's quite good that he's the full-time parent. He knows how to. He gets up, and while I sort of very sleepily make my coffee, he gets all the lunches made, and he has to remind me to do like the 6-year-old's hair, which is pretty much all I can manage to do. and then he gets them off to school, and I go, now I'm in Auckland, now I get in the car and drive myself to work, and that's kind of what happens. Previously, I obviously, because I was in Whangarei, I wasn't even involved in that bit, and in fact I used to essentially live the life of a carefree single person and stay out late at night playing Pokemon Go while he did the hard stuff.
So you had a wife. You kind
yeah,
of
I had a wife.
wife.
I did have the wife. I had the really great
What was
thing.
your 6-year-old's hair like by the end of the week, though? Because I just had a week away with the baby, and Esther's hair didn't get done for a week. It was pretty great when I got back.
So I have to say that I think you just have to let some things go. And things are like, hair's like, well,
The ultimate challenge with that is, with the daughter, is the ballet bun.
Oh, yeah,
God, the
I
ballet
remember that.
bun is
I think that's like an A+. That's like a high level. You got the ponytail, then you've got the French plait is probably like a level 2, 3.
right.
Yeah.
You've got to do the YouTube tutorials for
Yeah,
that's how you nail
You
that.
got to hold them down while you watch the YouTube.
Yeah. So if I can go all the way back though. So the phases, so I fully breastfed my children, but I also went back to work 6 weeks after giving birth for both children, and at that time I was locuming. So essentially I was travelling to different places, different cities around New Zealand and Australia for work, sometimes as frequently as every couple of weeks. And at that stage, we only had a baby, and as you know, there's an age where they're a lot more portable. So you just bring them on the plane with you and breastfeed them to sleep, and then you're there and you get your car and everything, and so my husband used to come with me. I used to arrange my clinics. I'm in the very lucky situation of working in a workplace which already has milk fridges and breast pumps available. So, but even so, I did have to have some relatively bolshy words with management to say, book my clinics with gaps in them, so that when my husband texts me, what we called the booby call, with the baby's woken up and he's really, really hungry. He's hangry. And I'll be like, right. And so my husband would be like trying to strap this like screaming tiny newborn into the car seat. And I'd be like trying to say goodbye to my patient. And then he'd like basically roaring with like sirens going, and then like literally like grab this little baby.
You should
and
have
like
had a little
walk
siren
it.
on the top in the shape of a boob.
Yeah, we probably should have.
With a nipple.
Yeah, that's actually a really good marketing idea. I think that's actually
That's
a business
great.
potential. Yeah. and then he'd like literally sometimes I'd be like, bye, and I'd hear this like pat, 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 and my husband would be like basically go, right, and be like, okay, right, and yeah, and sometimes, of course, we'd forget to close the door, and my workmates would go, whoa! And it's like, come on, you're a paediatrician, you've seen this before. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that even in my workplace, which, should really be the most booby-friendly workplace ever, they still had to get used to it. And so, yeah, so I did successfully breastfeed. I mean, basically, I weaned my first child at 2.5 years and my second child at 3 years. So they're self-weaned. So, yeah.
Yeah, give that a round of applause.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty great.
And I did it because I loved it, and I sort of also want to sort of acknowledge the massive kind of guilt trips that particularly the medical or nursing profession put mothers through who about breastfeeding. I think that's wrong as well. But me personally, I was really lucky. I had boobs and they worked, and that was really important. And I also, I didn't luckily suffer from any of the the postnatal depressions, which are so incredibly common. So I was able to essentially go back to work with attitude. And I also I was actually really happy to be at work. I didn't think of them very much, except for when I got the booby call, and then I was like, oh yeah, I've got a kid. And oh yeah, and my boobs have suddenly got, But yeah, I think, and then later on, I think I'm acting a lot more, in our relationship, I am essentially working like that, acting a bit like that husband who works away for work and then comes back and slips back into the dad role for the weekend. But it did have consequences, which is essentially, I also didn't really have mothering rights because my husband being from a very large extended family, other people took the role of the mother while I was away. So his mother and his sister did cooking, childcare. That also meant they made some of the decisions. So I'd come back and, someone had done my child's hair. And I'm like, who did her hair? Oh my God. Or, someone had bought her a dress, or they were eating something fried. And I'd be like, oh my God, fried. So there was all that stuff. So I think, and for me...
Did it feel like because you weren't there Monday to Friday, you had less right to say, that's my child, I don't want them to have fried food?
Absolutely, yeah. And other stuff, like, originally my children were sleep trained, when they were with us travelling around, even though they were in different places, we still managed to, stick to the rules. There are no rules, by the way, but I was quite proud of myself that I'd kind of followed my own recommendations that I was giving out to people, and they'd kind of worked. And I was like, look at me, I'm such an awesome parent. But then I realised, they were living in the grandparents' home for some time while we were renovating as well in Auckland, and then I realised that you can't train grandparents, you can train grandparents. So I kind of gave up.
Yeah. That's quite, is there some grief involved in that? Yeah.
And also I think that culturally you do get that, even if I'm quite happy to, I'm not so, I wear my things lightly, the emotional stuff. I think I do, maybe I don't. But even with that, people kind of come and remind you all the time. Yeah. Like people always ask you about your children when you're at work as well. And I don't know if they would if I was just your standard guy in a suit.
Mm-hmm. I'd say probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I find I still get if I show up at work or in some kind of professional setting, because my baby's only one, often the first question is, where's the baby? People are very... If they know you have young kids, they're like, what are you doing out without them?
Yeah, partly that's because I always want to smell a baby's head. but there's, what do you do? When Holly was younger, my daughter Holly, went on tour, people would not say, how are you, what time's your show, there's still tickets. They'd go, where's your child? And I'd, say things like, oh, I think she's in the boot, I don't know. But yeah, it was like, how can you arrange your life to be not in the same building as your child? Well, Raj, can I ask you, because there are 26,000 stay-at-home dads in New Zealand, so you're in a small, select group of people, and I hear from other stay-at-home dads, or even just dads at the weekend with their kids, people saying, oh yeah, you babysitting your kid. Do you get some of that rather than...
There was that great tweet about this. I can't remember who it was, but a mum said, I'm going away for the weekend or whatever, or for a long weekend of work, and my male partner's going to be looking after the kids. And people went, wow, what an amazing thing he's doing. And she went, yes, he's really thrilled to continue being a parent. This kind of, he's but. So no, you were asking about...
Does that happen to you? Do people respond differently to you because you are the fundamentally the primary caregiver?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's a big cultural divide. Like when I go home to India, my other home, I think there would be people who would, women and men would, or women especially, who would probably meet me with garlands at the airport because it's just such an otherworldly conception that someone could be this involved. And if we were having this conversation, and you know, and all of these details that are so familiar to any kind of hands-on parent, that I would participate and know what they were talking about, I think to a lot of people in India, especially mums, that's like really, that's like someone from another planet, and some, you know. But thankfully, I think I can say less so here. Like I think you know, I don't feel at all like I stand out or anything. But from one of the things I think it does make you more aware of is, and Renee's been talking about it, and so have others, is you know, is all of the other invisible contributions, or contributions that perhaps in the past would go invisible. So for example, I'm incredibly aware of the fact that when Sasha comes home at 5:45, like she might have had this 8.5-hour day full of stuff that, you know, she only gives me the kind of vague details, but then she's kind of determined to plunge into her role of being a mum. And spend a huge amount of time kind of with Leela, and then she kind of does bedtime, and where, you know, traditionally the man coming home from work is expected, you know, you can relax, the major part of your day is done.
Right, you
But
get to read the paper and have
on the
dinner.
table.
Yeah. Whereas I find I'm always very aware of that with Sasha, the extent to which she then has the energy for 3 or 4 more hours with our daughter, who has very late bedtime, which is partly cultural because I'm from India where we all go to bed late. But also, you know, the other thing I want to say is that in terms of invisible contributions is, for example, even now, I'm like, say this gathering now that the 4 of us are able to be here, there is someone contributing to the children being okay, and we have complete peace of mind. And so in that respect, the caregiver we've had, the creche Leela used to go to, whenever I'm writing and I have a great morning of the writing going well, I'm aware that it's not just me, it's all of these people who've contributed to that peace of mind, that quiet in the house. So that level, you know, I'm much more aware of that, the idea that for everything to work well, there are grandparents, there's family members, whanau, there's caregivers, and all of them are contributing for that smooth appearance of the swan.
Yeah.
So.
Now, look, I'm really conscious of the time, but the things that I want to move to are the problems, the specific problems, and then I want us to talk about some solutions. One of the things that, if I was an asshole, I'm going to pretend that I am for a minute. Holly, when you talked about looking out the window in Bowen House across the harbour to where your husband and child were, if I was an asshole, I would say that's proof that women with newborn children shouldn't work.
Well, I mean, I think luckily we've got Renee here who's just given the counter experience, because I think it was proof that I shouldn't have been at work at that time because it was not good for my mental and emotional health. But I mean, well, so I guess taking a step back, like the thing I often think about is what really needs to change if we're going to change some of the stuff we've been talking about here is a really different, a quite radically different conception of what work is, you know, what parenting is, and how we all collectively divide up our day and how we spend our time. And so thinking about Parliament specifically, because that's, I guess, the context that I'm most familiar with, in some ways it can be quite a child-friendly environment because Parliament only sits some days of the week, and on the days when it's not sitting, you can do whatever you want. There's no, you know, you're expected to be out seeing your constituents and being active in your community and attending all the events you're invited to, but you don't have to. You could be at home, you could take your child with you to any of those things. So on those days, Parliament can be quite a flexible working environment. However, on the days when it is sitting, you know, there are very strict and rigid rules about when you have to be in the house, when you have to be in a select committee meeting, when you have to be in a caucus meeting. And so some of the stuff around expressing milk or bringing the baby into breastfeed, those were very logistically challenging because luckily I was in the Green Party and they're fine with boobs out in a caucus meeting, but I don't know if all of the parties would be the same.
I don't think you do that in New Zealand
But they
first.
should be. But, like, I reckon it's really good for people to just sit there and have to, you know, like you've had.
Yes,
Yeah,
just
I mean,
deal with it,
I mean,
guys.
they're just boobs,
Seriously.
guys. I mean, God, they're biological things.
We made a
you
mistake
know.
when we called it breastfeeding. We just should
Yeah.
have called it baby feeding because
Yeah.
it's putting the word breast in it. You're feeding your child. What, you know, Jacinda's fantastic response to it's something about breastfeeding, and she said, "Well, I have to do it because otherwise my child will die." Can we talk a little bit about, I'm jumping now, but can we talk a little bit about that fascinating conversation we've had in New Zealand since our Prime Minister gave birth to a whole new voter, and and the response that the world has had to that. How has this changed things, moved things along? I mean, you must have been fascinated by.
Yeah, I have been. I mean, my primary feeling is, thank God I'm not doing that. To be perfectly honest, I do feel really thrilled and excited and proud, you know, to be modelling this to the world and to have a Prime Minister who's so representative of me and the stage of life that I'm in. And I can only imagine what's going on under here because it's just 10 times an order of magnitude of what I was doing as a backbench opposition MP, and that was really difficult. There's a part of me that worries that mums who are doing it tough will look at our Prime Minister and think, God, if she can do that, why am I finding it so difficult to just even get out of the house in the morning with my kid? Like, why won't they put their shoes on? And that's breaking me for the day. And here's our Prime Minister just looking like a beautiful swan. I do worry about that. But what I hope most of all is that the message that we get from having a Prime Minister doing what she's doing is about how can we keep making changes that make that more possible for more people, rather than looking at her doing that and thinking, well, clearly if that can be done, we don't need to change the systems here, you know. So things like the hours that Parliament sit, things like having more breaks in the time of in meetings and select committees, and you know, in select committee, if you step out and you change the numbers of the balance of the committee, they'll take a vote without you and they'll pass the bill, you know, because you've gone out of the room. So you can't go out and feed your baby in that kind of situation. So that's that's about Parliament and politics. But in general, workplaces in general, I think, would be wonderful if it was all much more normal to work part-time, to work flexibly, to have children coming in and out of workplaces, to have partners sharing the work week between them. All of those things, I think, would make a huge difference to this type of conversation. And I hope that having our Prime Minister doing what she's doing normalises that, rather than perpetuates the idea that women can do anything and you just have to have the right will. And you know,
I think it's been quite astounding to see, though, how, you know, she's been really open about, you know, just because I'm doing this, you know, I've got a partner that's staying at home, I've got family,
And
I've got
staff.
and staff, you know, and I think that I'm really glad that she's been open about that conversation. But what I think I've loved probably the most about, you know, seeing Jacinda do this is that, you know, when Clark is at home with the baby, it is this massive kind of realignment of the way that we're thinking about parenting roles. And I think, you know, to kind of borrow from you know, like a same-sex paradigm, I think one of the kind of great things about that is that there really aren't those kind of assumptions in that situation. I think those assumptions are what set us up, you know, especially in a heterosexual, you know, situation, to struggle, because if there are all these preconceived notions of, oh, men do this and women do this, then it's very difficult to negotiate around flexibility and, you know, who is going to have responsibility at this time and that time. And I think that seeing Jacinda and Clark turn the whole thing on its head, I think it's been really empowering. And for a lot of women my age, a lot of my friends, it's been like, wow, okay, so actually, this is a discussion that I can have with my partner if they're doing that, because yeah, I don't just actually have to be the default parent at home, which I think is really, it's awesome.
I want to backtrack a little. How difficult was it for you and Sasha to work out that you would be the primary caregiver, the at-home parent?
I will come to. I wanted to say one thing in that Holly's thought sparked in me, which is this idea that if you're not present, I mean, it was literally sparked by what Holly said, which is a very kind of vivid realization. Like, if you're not present in the room when decisions are being made, that's one of the first ways and the first steps to being disenfranchised. So if you're not, and so the idea of Parliament being a much more family-friendly place in every way, just as corporate boardrooms should be and other places of power should be, which is, otherwise you could I wonder if someone has done a study in different countries to show that if people of either gender and of a particular age group are missing from the decision-making process at a certain age in their lives, like the fossil record, they're there in their 20s and early 30s, and then they disappear, and then come back in their 50s, issues affecting that age group, such as getting on the property ladder, such as job flexibility, are just not addressed to that extent by those powerful bodies. So, it's one of these things. I wonder if there's any kind of
I think that's really true. And
correlation.
I relate a story in my book about Catherine Rich, who was previously a National MP, now the head of the Food and Grocery Council, someone from the very opposite end of the political spectrum to me, who was very supportive to me when I was pregnant. But when I had that conversation with her, she actually told me that, so she had her babies while she was in Parliament and she breastfed them in Parliament. She was a real trailblazer for that, and for some reason in the late 90s when that happened, it just happened, nobody noticed. I always think we should acknowledge her in these conversations now, because there are lots of women in Parliament doing it now. She breastfed her baby in the house. I don't think anyone else has done that yet.
I was unaware of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
nobody
we
really
all
knows.
know about Ruth Richardson setting a creche up or a feeding room
No,
or
she took
something.
her baby into the chamber. But she said to me, at that time was when they were passing Sue Bradford's members' bill around allowing mothers in prisons to have the babies living with them in mother and baby units in prison so they could breastfeed. And her gut response, and I guess her politically tribal response, had been like, prison is no place for a baby. But then she had her babies and she was breastfeeding her babies in Parliament when those decisions were made, and she changed her view because she thought, well, look what I'm doing. Of course these mothers should have access to their babies. So there's a prime example of that. Yeah.
I mean, there is research about women in boardrooms, right? So the women and ethnicity. So the more diverse a boardroom is, the more successful the company is. That's international research, which I guess means, I mean, like, clearly if a bunch of old white guys,
Don't apologise.
are making decisions, but for a consumer group that is not old white guys, then they might actually make the wrong decision.
Or not take, with the best intention, not take into account issues that don't affect them anymore.
Just won't have ever occurred to them.
And not just consumers, employees in the business. If the board level is actually not able to understand all of the issues, then it won't filter down into the workforce.
Yeah. Let's do a quick fire wish list for what we want to change about our working environments and what we want to change about the way we maybe arrange our families. What do we want from the workplace? What do we want from our domestic situations? Can we do that?
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that people should just stop seeing gender. I also think people should stop seeing skin colour, because I think that a person is a person, right? And the decisions that they make through their life are their decisions. They've got their own reasons for doing it. So you're not going to look at a woman who's at work and go, where's your baby? Or why aren't you pregnant yet? Just like for a man, you wouldn't be able to say, looking after a kid in the playground, you don't walk over and pat them on the head and go, oh, how cute, you're looking after your child today. I think that we should each, maybe, I don't know that I think legislative is really important, absolutely, because I know that it does, force societal change, but that I also think that we each have our own personal responsibility to kind of not do that and to maybe call other people out for doing it, because that's kind of where it starts. And going back to Jacinda as well, I think that she's doing a really important thing because she has openly acknowledged that it is, she's in a very privileged situation, as am I, as was my lawyer who brought her baby into work with her. She actually set up a creche while she was doing really high-powered kind of lawyer-type consultations and openly did it with her clients. She said, here are my babies as you walk past, So I think the more powerful women who are used to being bossy in their professional lives do lead the way, and that if they acknowledge that it is indeed their privilege which allows them to do that, that potentially gives permission to the other women and the other men that are less privileged to say, okay, I can take a bit of that and roll with it where I am in my journey.
My wish list is kind of a bit more pedestrian and practical. I would love to see like a 30-hour work week normalised.
Yeah.
And that, but not that we pay 80% of the salary, but a full-time work week is 30 hours. You get paid your full salary. I think there's research to suggest that people are more productive in that time, but also there's just so much more room for family life. I think in a work week that's constructed like that, and at home. I just wish there was a fairy who could come in at the end of the day and just tidy all the toys off the floor of the lounge. I actually don't mind mess in other parts of my house, but for some reason the lounge floor, just walking into the room, the cacophony of in my head when there's toys all over the lounge floor, if that could just be taken care of, that would be great. Yeah.
I think my thoughts are obviously all hypothetical, but a couple of things. One is I wish that workplaces wouldn't forget that their employees may be parents or family members. It's like there's been this historic idea that you leave all your personal stuff at home when you come into the office, whereas actually that's just not feasible for us as human beings. We don't kind of leave half of our soul at home when we go to the office. So I think, a whole reimagining of the workplace, because it was historically set up to benefit, and I won't apologise, but older white men. It was historically. So I think a complete, even a stock take of opinions from the female workforce in each workplace to say to them, what would make your jobs easier for you to be both a parent and an employee? That's one. I think from a personal, in the personal realm, I just think that open negotiating table where there's no assumption that one person is going to do one thing and the other person is going to do something else. Because I've found that when I've been dating men, that actually even young men sometimes have quite firm ideas about, you will be staying home and looking after the children.
Really?
Yeah, actually, even in my generation, I wonder in some ways whether there's actually been a bit of a kickback, where the kind of Gen X shattered all of these expectations, and then millennials may have kind of had this kickback to tradition.
A new conservatism.
Yeah, a little bit. So I just think, I agree with you about the breaking down those kind of gender preconceptions and just a real openness, I think, to figure out what works for each individual whānau, because it's no one size fits all on this.
I was going to connect a thought that I had once to a thought I recently heard. Do you know Yuval Harari, who wrote 'Sapiens' and Homo Deus? And I recently heard him in an interview express a kind of version of that thought. And once I picked up Sasha, and Leela was in the back, and and she'd been at her caregivers for the afternoon. And I said to Sasha, as we were driving home, that you taught linguistics all day and did university admin-related work, and I wrote, But actually, and of course that's important, what you did is important, my writing was no doubt immortal and will last through the ages.
Very important.
But actually, who did the work that is most important to us today, which is make sure that Leela was happy and looked after, and what does the market tell us to pay her? Which at that time was $10 an hour, and and I just found that the market, the work that we would drop everything for, if there was the person who was doing that work but the market had said pay her $10 an hour, and along with the other parents, that's what we did. And Harari, in this interview I was thinking of, says something really interesting. He says, all of us are paranoid about which of our jobs will be automated in the future and will be put out of work. And it looks like, an ever-increasing percentage of jobs that we consider lucrative now, including legal, medical, things that are like, blue-chip jobs now, there might be aspects of them automated in the future. And he says, and we worry about what will people do. And he says, one of this interesting thing, he says, but we still are not flipping a switch in our heads and deciding to revalue the work that only humans can do. So for instance, caregiving in all its forms. If we as a society take a look at caregiving and decide to value it much more and pay people much more for caregiving in all its forms, suddenly a lot more people would have money in their pockets, feel a lot more valued, and it would also attract new people because people would say, hey, that's quite well paid and socially prestigious. So it's about flipping that switch. And one thing I would like to see change is caregiving in all its forms, not just for children, just enormously more valued. So
Brilliant. Oh, I like you. We've only got a couple of minutes left for questions, so throw a hand in the air and Kerry will come to you with a microphone if you would like to. Oh, these very engaged ladies at the front.
Well, that was most refreshing, and thank you all very much. There is a crisis of care in our society that goes from conception to death, and I just want to endorse that. I want to ask you a question. Should the person who's actually doing the work, and we've acknowledged whānau and grandparents and extended families, should they actually have some legal rights? It's a very tricky question. There's a review of the family court, submissions due by the 14th of November. At the moment, the only people with any kind of legal right to be concerned about the welfare of the child are the two parents. Should those who maybe 1/5 of all our preschoolers are primarily cared for by their grandparents, for example, should there be a legal reorganisation of responsibility that goes along with care as part of your reorganisation?
That sounds like a question for a politician. I don't want, as a grandparent, to have legal responsibility because I like being the evil, wicked person who fills them up with sugar and sends them home to me. And if I'm legally responsible, I might get sued. Holly.
I mean, my gut, having not thought about that particular issue before, my gut response is that I would hope, and I know this probably doesn't happen in all cases, but the ideal would be, if there's that level of grandparental and extended whānau engagement, that the decision making around that child is also healthy and collective and communal, and so that while the legal guardianship might rest with the parents, that there are healthy, productive conversations going on about how to care for that child, and when those break down, I guess that's what the family court exists for. We could get into all kinds of detail about what's happened in the family court since 2014, and the fact that there's no longer access to counselling and family dispute mediation takes place, but that doesn't necessarily take the views of the child into consideration, which, putting on my Office of the Children's Commissioner hat, would be an area we would also say is not given due weight. So I wouldn't be changing the law, but I would be changing practice.
Yeah, I actually work with children in crisis of care, I suppose, and I just want to acknowledge that there are many steps that you can take before you get to the court process, or actually in between. So anybody can put in a report of concern, for example, and get Oranga Tamariki involved. I know there's a lot of trust around Oranga Tamariki, but their goal is indeed to assist. And of course, alongside Oranga Tamariki are all the health and educational services and the children's teams, which I'm not sure if you're aware of. So, and so there have been many cases where a concerned grandparent has essentially raised an alarm, and there's been a process where people have said, okay, tell me your story, tell me your story, tell me your story. Obviously, I totally agree with Holly that the most important person whose views need to be taken into account is the child. It totally needs to be child focused and on the needs of the child. I don't care who else feels that they have ownership over the child. I think it's the child and what their needs that need to be considered, and certainly the system at the moment does try to focus on that. And there are other processes such as family group conferences, which are actually legally binding, that can take place before you get to a court process. So I personally don't think, I think it'll be very impractical to have a law that if you look after a child, you have a legal right over what it does, because then schools look after children a lot of the time. Do they also have a legal right? They have a legal right in ensuring that the child goes to school at the moment, and they can enforce that, but they don't have any legal right about what happens to that child other times. And so I think, yeah, it becomes a bit of a struggle, because of course in my situation then, and I feel worried, then I might not have that many legal rights over my child. And I mean, there's an underlying concern as well. Mothers used to be, they used to have the balance of judgment. Say there was a custody battle, it's not going to happen because, we're together for life and all this kind of thing. But if there was a custody battle and my husband is the stay-at-home dad who has the most amount of time, in today's changing environment, they would take that into account when awarding custody. And I think that would be, for me, that's a great, that is something I have thought about previously. Should I be, as well as the mummy guilt, should I just be there, so that people can't say that I wasn't there if it comes to the crunch. But at the same time,
it introduces fear into that relationship if other people have the right to do things with the child.
Women being punished for another new way for having a career.
Well, yes, but then if you take it away from the dad, who's the caregiver, they're also being punished.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think that sometimes having laws and things get in the way of,
it's a blunt instrument.
Yeah, the law is a really blunt instrument. The law isn't ass, right? Ass. The law is an ass, I think, as someone famously said. But I mean, I think that as a society, we probably do need to open up these conversations and have them, and that we need to talk to each other so that these things, when these unfortunate situations occur, that we can, that there's somebody going, but focus on the child. What do they want? What do they want now? But also, what do they want in 2 years? Because the child changes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great answers. Lovely. Have we got? Can we take one more question, or we're probably out of time?
That people come up and have a chat to you.
That's a great
while
idea.
you're, with a book or without a book. Come and have a chat
That's
to people,
great.
because we're fortunate that it's an intimate gathering, and people can have time to do that after the show. Yeah. Did you want to say any concluding
I was just
remarks?
we were going to do our very quick fire, 10 seconds each. Is it 20 seconds? Piece of advice that we might, not that any of us are, giving advice to people, but a little nugget of wisdom that we would pass on to somebody who is a working parent. I warned you all about that. You're looking really terrified. Let's start with Raj.
What I would say is, following on from both what Holly and Renee spoke about, which is kind of do what's right for your unit, and keep reviewing it over time, because there is not only which refers to resisting not just peer pressure and what others are talking about, or even your own preconceived ideas before you started on this whole thing about, whether it's how many children you should have, when they should go to bed, how many activities they should do. Kind of all such things. Resist peer pressure, resist your own preconceived ideas, and go with what works for your unit, no matter how bizarre it may look on the outside, such as our daughter having her afternoon nap, still the age of 1 and almost 2. I had to bring her booster seat into the house And because only with the rocking of her booster seat on the carpet and me sitting next to her and reading is when she slept. She didn't sleep horizontally during the day. So, and that worked for us. It would have looked bizarre to anyone else, but you know.
Do what works for you.
Yeah.
And keep checking in
Yeah.
that it's still working.
Yeah, that would be mine.
Great.
Yeah. I think my advice only comes from my own trying to find a work-life balance, which is, you know, grappling with the relationship and work, and then potentially maybe adding children in at a later date. But what I've learnt this year is that, you know, actually perfection is so punishing. And kind of endorsing what Raj was saying, trying to live up to some kind of external expectation or ideal of how you're meant to do things is just completely unfeasible. So, you know, I think I would just say to any working parent to remember that you're never going to be perfect, and there are always going to be things that are going to go wrong, but just to always remember you're doing an amazing thing for society.
I would just say lower your standards.
Yeah.
In all realms. Yeah.
Fantastic. Renee.
I would say be upfront. So be upfront with potential employers, and keep on reminding them because they have short memories. But also be upfront with your partner and the other people that partner with you on caring for the child. Just about who's going to, you know, all the bits. I have to say that I've learnt this from, I'm not a very good practitioner of taking my own advice. So, I mean, for example, last night I kind of mentioned that I was coming to Nelson, and yeah, and I mean, I think I'd mentioned it before, but but I mean, the thing is that yeah, I mean, you do have to be really upfront with your partners in care to just communicate all the time about all the other things that you have to do to fulfill everything else that makes you happy, but also make sure that your children are being well looked after, and more importantly, that you guys are connecting with your children. So
Brilliant. Great. My advice is first drink at 6 p.m. So
4 p.m. 4 p.m. Michelle.
I just hold on, because once I start, I can't stop. So I push it back to 6. Thank you all so much. I've really enjoyed that. And so please do thank Renee and Holly and Lizzie and Raj. You guys have been great. Brilliant.
And a big thank you to Michelle for chairing a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this subject continues tomorrow morning with a thinking brunch, which is about all the difficult decisions parents, grandparents and whānau now need to make in the digital age, the impact of technology on the family and the home. So please come along tomorrow morning as well. Also, a plug for Raj's session this afternoon at 3:30 here in the granary. And tomorrow, 1:30, Michelle's coming to talk about her book, How We Met. And one last thing, remember to breathe. So, your title.
Even though the print book isn't out till early next year, the e-book is available now. And
I've read an excerpt, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. So this is lovely.
So please join me again in thanking all of our panel, including Michelle.
Thank you.